addressing the dangers of lead in the home. I'm Jill Horner. This is Comcast Newsmakers. With me is Paul Schmidt. He is an attorney with Zarwin Baum. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me here.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the impact that lead-based paint can have in the home, particularly when it comes to small children.
With small children, ingestion of lead-based paint, ingestion of really any lead, causes neurological problems that are permanent. They're irreversible, and even a small amount of lead paint, even smaller than the size of a fingernail, can cause serious irreversible problems.
So we're talking about a small amount of lead-based paint that can have long-term implications for a child's learning, a child's development. But let's talk a little bit about what the city is doing right now. There is a new law that applies to homes that were built prior to 1978. So we're talking about a large amount of homes in a city that has an older housing stock. This is applicable to landlords leasing to tenants with children. How would this work?
Well, there's always been a requirement not to correct problems of flaking paint and things like that. What this now does is, at the time a landlord signs a lease, they must have first had their property inspected, that unit inspected, by somebody who's qualified to inspect for lead-based paint problems, and have a certification that the property is lead safe or lead free.
And now, when we talk about this new law, what will this now do in terms of the landlord's responsibility?
It's going to require them to get information from a tenant, and that information is whether there's going to be a child 6 and under who's going to live in the unit. The trick is that the law butts up against some of the fair housing requirements and prohibitions, which prohibit you from even asking about whether there's going to be children in a home. So what we're advising landlords to do is, when they first make a unit available for tenants to see, is still not ask anything about whether there's going to be children. Wait until they've vetted a tenant. If they determine that that tenant is suitable, when they make an offer, that's the time to find out if there's going to be children 6 and under. And if they haven't already had the unit inspected, then they need to get it inspected, and that can take several weeks to have the inspection done and get the results back.
Otherwise, there is that concern that people may be excluded. You come up against fair housing issues just because they do have a small child.
Correct. Landlords need to be very careful not to violate the fair housing requirements and the prohibition on asking about children.
If remediation does need to take place, what does that include when it comes to lead-based paint?
That's a good question. It varies depending on the home. Generally, what you're trying to do is avoid any flaking or scraping of paint where there's going to be dust. So in some homes, there may just be a little bit of flaking, and you can just have that properly taken care of, removed, and painted over. In other homes, there may be much more serious damage to the paint, and it requires more extensive remediation. So the cost can vary depending on the unit.
And then you do need to have a certification, this inspection process. How often does that need to be done, and what are the costs associated there?
That's another good question. If the unit is determined to be lead-free, so there isn't even lead paint in the unit, that certification lasts forever, and you don't need to ever go back in and have it tested again. So every time there's going to be a turnover of a tenant, you can use the pre-existing certification. The landlord can use that. If the unit is determined just to be lead-safe, where there's lead-based paint but it's not chipping, it's not creating dust or chips that a child might be exposed to, that certification is good for 2 years. So if there's turnover within that 2-year period, the landlord can use the existing certification. If the turnover is after that, then they've got to get another inspection.
All right, important information for landlords and tenants, and particularly those with small children. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
We've been talking with attorney Paul Schmidt. I'm Jill Horner.